on whether the MOEY would provide subsidiaries. I think we meant subsidies. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Page 8, I have a correction on the second paragraph at the end. The paragraph that begins with Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, the second paragraph, at the end of that paragraph, it says she suggested that there should be a standard in place and noted that the bill would assist, I think the "in" should be taken out, would assist persons to choose to homeschool.
Persons who choose to homeschool.
Okay. Would assist persons who choose to homeschool. All right. Page 9.
Under questions, comments, and answers on page 9, Chair, the second sentence, consideration of subclause, there should be no L.
Yeah. Page 10. Final page, page 11. Confirmation of the minutes. Member Cuthbert, second. Member Hamilton. Thank you so much. So the matters for discussion this morning is the continuation of the review of the matrix of submission. So members, I think we left off at clause 7. Function of the council.
Chair, these matrices, they're all different. I mean, I'm trying to identify if the two that I just received are an addition to what we had before, or if, you know, it has been condensed. And so this is...
It has been condensed. So everything that was before is included.
So I don't need to use my previous?
Not unless you made notes on your previous one.
Which we did.
Okay.
And these would have included some comments section or responses coming from the technical team. That shaded area, the highlighted area. Right. On the first one.
So if you look in the left section of the page on the left hand of the page on the section, we'd be at section 7, functions of council. Are we all situated now? So remember, the function of the council should be to register and license teachers, grant the authorization to teach, investigate the fitness to teach, determine the eligibility requirements, determine the categories, keep and maintain the register of teachers, the role of instructors, regulate the practice of teaching, and it goes on for a few pages. So that's the section that we're looking at this morning. And there's a recommendation to remove section 1, 1, 3, and M from the list of stated functions of the council. So if you have your draft bill, if you could just take that out. So 7, 1, 3. So, Mrs. Anastasia, in this bill, it says that would be under section D. Am I getting that right? So 7.1, section 7.1, and if you go down to D, is that the one that we're looking at? D3, or we don't have it right? We can look at the rationale in the meantime. The rationale for recommending the removal of that section, section 1.1. Member Tova, am I going down that correctly?
Chair, I'm not following because I'm not sure which proposal this is or whose proposal.
Okay, from the Teachers Colleges of Jamaica. Teachers Colleges of Jamaica.
7.1, I see a 7.1E, I don't see any.
7.1
I don't see a D.
7.1 is the functions of the council.
Right, but it says 7.1G to remove 7.1G from the list.
7.1G
and from the previous
7.1I.
matrix that we had, they have 7.1E3. So I'm not sure if. So I have to use all the matrices because I would have made notes on the previous. I have this current one, but it would appear as though they're not saying the same things.
All right, so could I ask our technical people just to help us with that? Because it's not lining up with the bill.
Thank you, Minister. Good morning, everyone. These categories are categories established in the ministry under the existing act. They speak of teachers to be registered. Then the Roman numeral 2 is not yet, is what we are working on, and Roman numeral 3 is already in the act. These are established categories.
But we're just trying to.
So I recommend that we keep the categories.
Okay. So, but the specific one now that's recommended to be removed, we just want to identify it, just to remind ourselves. Read it. Can you read it?
Minister, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Ms. Sherland. Thank you.
Sherland.
Okay, go ahead. We're just wanting to ensure that we understand what the recommendation is. So whether we agree or disagree, we want to ensure that we fully understand what it is.
I believe that the Teachers Colleges of Jamaica is requesting that 7.1E be removed. But as Dr. Gordon was saying, she is recommending that it be kept. So 7.1e reads, subject to the provisions of this Act.
Ms. Shoreland, sorry. That's not what's written here on the matrix. We just have 7.1, which looks like another 1, 3, and M. So if there's a mistake in that, we need to know.
Perhaps I'm looking on the previous matrix.
If I may, there is a 7.1G, but there is also a 7.1E as well. It's before. So if you go further up, you will see the first set of recommendations under the functions of the council.
Okay, I don't believe we're all looking at the same thing. Yeah. We're on page 5.
Sure. Is it possible for us to just identify the
On
last...
page 5. On
Okay,
page 5.
sorry, page 5.
Is
page
it
5.
possible for us to just identify the last proposal that we did before we took the break? Just what's the last thing that we looked at? And then we can start after that, because I think that would make it a little easier. I think the last one that I have documented was 7.1J, which we had accepted, and we ended there. So after 7.1J, we go to 7.1E3, but you had mentioned just now about a 7.1D.
It's on the other page. I was ahead. So we need to be on page 5. We need to be on page 5, member. Yeah, bottom of page 5. So, right, so the recommendation is to remove section 7.1E3 from the list. And the rationale, as you can see, would be remove it to allow the council to issue authorizations based on the unique circumstances of each applicant rather than on limited preconceived categories. And there were some countries cited. The response, the recommendation from our technical persons are that the council to determine eligibility based on categories established, and that for this provision to remain. As you read the recommendation and the rationale for it and what is being recommended, do we have any comments? Members, for those who are online, whenever you're asking a question, please turn on your camera.
Chair, I'm trying to understand the recommendation made by the JTA, Jamaica Colleges of Teachers, sorry.
Yeah.
I would imagine that they are trying to prevent the council from identifying by categories different persons who are eligible. But I would imagine that they are of the thinking that if categories are identified, then persons would be excluded if they are not included in that category. So it really would be for the council to probably leave a catch-all to say, and any other category that may fit, or on a case-by-case basis, or something of that nature, rather than just make a list that is fixed. I think that may be the issue. So for persons who would be determined as eligible to be granted authorization to teach, rather than list a set of possible persons who could fall in that category, we could leave like a catch-all phrase to say, and any other person who may be deemed, such and such. Rather than just state categories and leave it fixed, I think the Teachers Council, Teachers Colleges of Jamaica wants it to be a little broader. So I think if we address that, then it should be okay.
That sounds reasonable. Members? Ms. Shoreland?
Agreed.
Yeah. Ms. Gordon? Anastasia?
Minister, could you please could the member repeat what she recommended just now for us?
Member Hamilton? Member Hamilton?
Clarity. Thank you.
So, based on the proposal from the Teachers Colleges of Jamaica, my understanding is that they are afraid that if we identify certain categories of persons to the exclusion of others, then parties would not be able to fall into this particular category. So I am proposing, instead of just listing and leaving the categories fixed, that we include a section that will incorporate persons who may come in from on a case-by-case basis, rather than just leave it at a fixed state.
But I am one, so that would amend E. But what other categories could there be apart from registered teachers, licensed teachers, and persons who are authorized to teach?
So on the persons who are authorized to teach, I imagine that is a little broad. So it would capture persons who would not necessarily be in the classroom. And from what we are seeing, we have a number of new areas, emerging areas that may come up that we cannot foresee at this point. So instead of fixing that section to only include certain people, we can leave it a little broader to incorporate things that may come up from time to time.
Go ahead.
Minister, I think the statement, persons who are eligible to be granted authorization to teach can be extended to include, as the member said, any other category that may be approved. I think that makes it more flexible. So I would go with that.
Members?
Also, it won't hurt. It won't hurt to just include it. Yeah.
Right, yeah. Members?
So clarity, Chair, that would be include a Roman numeral 4 then?
Or you could attach it to
or
the other one.
attach it to 3.
Yeah, so however the technical persons choose to make that amendment. Are we in favor of that suggestion? Yes. All right.
I just want to be clear, because based on what Member Hamilton has indicated, we're talking about anticipating the future, and not allowing it to be static. So if there's an addition that captures that in a Roman numeral 4, then that might treat with it.
Yes, that's what we're saying, Member. That's what Member Hamilton is saying. And I think what I heard from Ms. Sherland, who is our legal person, was saying that is acceptable. All right. So let us move on. Unless Ms. Anastasia, was there anything you wanted to add before we move on?
I was just thinking, Minister, just as Mrs. Sherland had indicated, the bill currently treats with registered license a grant of authorization to teach. I understand what member is saying about leaving a catch-all, but as it is now, the bill only treats in terms of the criteria that is to be met for each category is only these 3 categories that are in the bill. So if another category is to exist, there wouldn't be anything under the bill to treat with that category if it is to come in the future. So then the bill would still need to be amended to treat with that aspect of it. The act.
Yes,
when it is
I
promulgated.
appreciate that. Question. The council at some point will have to, I'm not sure if the legislation would deal with it or maybe some regulations that would treat with those persons who are eligible. So if it is we leave this as is and incorporate it somewhere else, maybe the regulations then that could also solve the problem. So I imagine that at some point there may be a listing of persons who may be deemed persons eligible to teach. Over time, that list will arise. So wherever that list is, whether it be regulations or internally at the council, then I believe that should have that catch-all to incorporate things that come up from time to time. I think that could also solve the problem.
Ms. Anastasia, will that work?
Minister, I think we would have to consider it further based on what members said. I know you're saying about the treating with it in the regulations, but as it is now, Part 5 treats with eligibility requirements for all three categories. So that's just my issue. Yes, starting at clause
27 and 28 specifically. Part 5, these are the eligibility requirements, and it lists them in 27.
Minister, if I may, through you.
Please go ahead, Ms. Sherland.
Because the identification of categories is so fundamental to the bill. If we are going to include other categories, it would be appropriate to put it here in clause 7. But so I have written some words. I don't know if the distinction is sufficient from 3 if we say any other persons authorized by the council from time to time, or any other eligible persons authorized by the council, from time to time. I don't know if that would be sufficient a distinction between from 3 for us to include it.
So just to be clear, you're saying in that clause 7, E, 3 or 4, to say, and any other persons authorized by the council from time to time?
Yes. But it as Miss Anastasia was saying, we really need to consider it some more to see if we should include a different category.
All right, so we'll allow the technical person to think on this.
Minister.
Go ahead, Member Green.
So I had always felt like the authorization to teach would be the sort of catch-all category. So I'm not sure if we need another catch-all. I think maybe we have to ensure that the council is sufficiently empowered to give an authorization to teach to, as Member Hamilton is saying, new areas that may arise, new people that may come forward. So, you know, and maybe the technical team can help me, because that was my belief, that authorization to teach would be a sort of catch-all that would allow, even if there's a new developing area, that you would not be able to find a registered teacher for, you could use the authorization in those terms.
Right. Thank you, member. As the technical persons say, they're asking for a little bit of thinking time around this. And so when we come back to the next meeting, they will let us know what they have thought. Senator Brown, Member Brown.
Thank you, Minister. My apology for lateness. I had another engagement at 9 o'clock, and so I have joined virtually. I share the view that we should await the technical people, legal people, developing a position on this so we can move forward. I just want to say that. My apology. Dr. Angela Brownberg also asked me to apologize for absence in her case.
All right, thank you, member. All right, with that, we will move on to, what's the best way to go down or across? Okay, we'll right to the University of the West Indies, to the right of that column. So we're asked to consider, in relation to Section 7.1I, to clarify whether there would be opportunity for the professional disciplinary associations to contribute to the professional learning framework. And the response is that the bill will be amended to include consultation with stakeholders in education. We're in favor. Members?
Yeah, I'm in support of that. I'm always in support of when you intend to make changes, that there's consultations with the stakeholders. The question I'd like to ask, however, is where will this insertion be placed in the bill? Just for clarity. If there's an agreement to have consultation.
Minister, through you, if I may assist.
Please go ahead, Ms. Sherlin.
So 7.1I, at the beginning of 7.1I, we are proposing that these words be included. In consultation with the stakeholders in the education sector, develop and maintain, adapt or incorporate, and so on.
Could you repeat that, please?
7.1I. So we are proposing to insert these words. In consultation with stakeholders in the education sector, develop and maintain, adapt or incorporate and apply a professional learning framework to support and promote the continuing professional development of registered teachers, licensed teachers, and instructors.
Thank you. Agreed.
Agreed. Agreed.
Minister, if I may.
Go ahead, Member Brown.
Thank you. I agree with Kawan, with Senator Gill on it generally, but in consultation with stakeholders, kind of broad, and I'm wondering if we need to qualify the stakeholders, because what does that mean, Mrs. Sherland? Does it mean everybody? Does it mean some? Are we excluding some when we consult with only some people? So I'm just wondering if it needs a further. Principally, I agree with whether it need relevant stakeholders or something like that that qualifies. You're talking about you're doing some for secondary education. Does that mean you consult with the primary? In other words, what makes it a little more specific than the general position? And I'm not opposed to it. I just want to see if we could be a little clearer.
Are you saying, Member Brown, are you saying to us that we need to define stakeholders so that there's no ambiguity, that persons don't feel that they are left out in the consultation? Now I'm just asking Member Brown.
Or on the other hand, wanting to be part of the consultation. And I'm not opposed to them wanting to be, but how do we protect from, if you don't consult with everybody, you have not consulted? That's what I wanted to make sure we address.
Yes,
Yeah,
Chair,
go ahead, Member Gale.
through you. In this case, when we establish this joint select committee, there are persons who consider themselves to be stakeholders who attended and participated. So that was a free-for-all. Anybody could be identify themselves as an interested group, as a stakeholder. Now, in this case, when we're going to be making changes, we don't want to have it wholesale, but we want to define who the stakeholders are. In this case, principals would be stakeholders, the teachers would be stakeholders, the students could be stakeholders, but it had a parent. There's a community of interest there. And so I'm of the view that in order to protect ourselves, we need to define what the stakeholders ought to be, if possible, as far as consultation is concerned.
And to prevent any judicial review applications.
You're preventing
judicial
what
review.
We consider that something that I wasn't a part of it.
Minister, through you, just to indicate that this is a term that is used quite frequently in the legislation. So then, if we're going to define, we would have to look at all the areas in the bill where the term is used.
Not necessarily. I think because it's based on now the function, what it is that we're trying to establish here in this particular clause. So I do understand what Senator Brown is saying, because it really has some legal implications in the future if it is that the term consultation is not adhered to strictly. So I would agree with narrowing it down for this particular clause to say this particular body should be consulted.
Minister, if I may, seeing that Mrs. Sherland raised the point that this is referenced in the bill on more than one occasion, we need to then look to see if there are other instances where we might need to narrow it, just as this in this instance.
If we were to insert the word relevant would that help? So relevant stakeholders.
I think relevant would have to find out from the drafter.
I am cautious about saying relevant.
Yes.
Because you know, once you use terms like relevant, it might be subjective. and it might appear as if you're seeking to exclude.
And
so
offend.
I'm of the preference of defining the stakeholders.
Relevant may offend others.
But members,
It certainly would offend me.
So, members, let me ask, when we're doing consultations, we generally go wide with them, right? Town hall meetings and so forth.
Yeah, but Chair, that is to establish a particular purpose. Now, if it is that you're going to consult generally, the term consultation can be used because you would incorporate quite a bit of persons. But if it is that you have a particular purpose like this one, there's no other entity that wants to be a part of this. So I would agree with incorporating or including the particular body that should be consulted. And out of an abundance of caution, as I said before, it has legal implications. So if the term is too loose, then other persons would feel themselves to be relevant and not consulted and can bring the council before the Supreme Court for judicial review application and can succeed.
You see,
If you list the categories and then you say any other such, okay.
The whole idea, whenever you make a list of persons within a legislation or within regulations, you exclude others by nature of what. But you identify those who you want to consult.
My last point on this is that, listen, look, this particular area is specific. It says to develop and maintain, adapt or incorporate, apply professional learning framework. It is specific. It's not any and anybody. It's not all and sundry who believe they must invite themselves to these consultations. It's targeted. Now, the other point that was made is where any other area within the bill that speaks to consultation, we need to examine it also. Because it might be overarching in nature, or it might be targeted or specific like this one. When we talk about consultation, and speaking on it on a trade union standpoint, if you're consulting with us, it means that there is a sharing of information and you anticipate from those that you consult with a certain type of response. So it's not to just come into a room and to listen and to talk and to hear and go away and hear what ministers say. You expect and anticipate that those that you are consulting with must be able to inform, to shape the decision that you are pursuing.
Chair, may I?
Yes,
Chair,
please, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. I would suggest that instead of saying at the very beginning of I, in consultation, we read the statement and we end it in consultation with bodies engaged in teacher development. So we'll do all of what the statement says, but in consultation with bodies engaged in teacher development. At the end. At the end.
That sounds like something I could support.
We start with develop and maintain and everything that's there. And we end by saying in consultation with bodies engaged in teacher development. So that would take care of university, colleges, some other bodies that are engaged with teacher development, including our associations or professional associations.
Member Green?
Yeah, I would support that. I would support that, Chair. So my intervention is fine. I would support what has been suggested by Dr. Gordon.
All right, thank you, members. We will take that and move on. All right, so we'll move to Section 7M. And it says stakeholders are being asked whether members of the council may conduct professional appraisals or whether education officers would continue to conduct the appraisal process given the connection between the ministry and the Jamaica Teaching Council. I would like some explanation for the response. Members, are you focused on that? So we're still on page 5. It starts on page 5. We're still under, well, we're under universe.
I recall this particular proposal, yes. And we had said that we would try to define appraisals because I think there was a misunderstanding as to what the appraisal would be in relation to. It wouldn't be the regular appraisal that would be done by a superior or supervisor, but for the professional standards in relation to this legislation. So I think that is where the issue came in that we need to resolve.
All right. Dr. Gordon, would love to hear the explanation for the response.
Thank you, Minister. This statement does not apply to the general appraisal of teachers. Teachers are appraised by their employers. But there's a special group called the master teachers, and they are selected at the national level. And therefore, their appraisal is done at a national level every 3 years. So we'll make amendments we'll adjust the text to reflect what it is supposed to say.
So Chair, so this reference was for the master teachers?
It's only for the master teachers that are designated nationally.
I didn't even know that.
So we'll have to make that adjustment. Yes. Thank you.
Member Gale, go ahead.
Sorry. That clarity is important because there was a great degree of apprehension being expressed by some teachers that the council going to appraise me, and the council never one day see me. The council never work with me. The council don't know what I'm doing in the school, and so it created, I must tell you, it created a degree of anxiety. So that clarity is important. Eh? So what is being assumed here, Minister, in the first instance, is that the professional appraisal by the council was being done on teachers in general. And teachers, the council don't operate with the teachers directly. It is the grade supervisors and maybe they're up to the level of the principal if there's an appeal. Internal mechanism. Now what is being suggested that there is another grouping that this professional appraisal will take place. And so there's going to be that amendment to give clarity to this particular area because it created concerns and anxiety.
Well, could we call it something different? Because when you say appraisals, if we say professional appraisals, it's going to mean, right. So we need to find a new term for it. And then I'm not so sure I understand this part about special consideration for master teachers in particular as a function going forward for the JTC, because the JTC, in my mind, is responsible for governance, right? They can hear disciplinary issues. Why would they even be involved in that aspect of it either? Go ahead, Dr. Gordon.
So we could refer.
One second. Member Brown, let us hear you, and then we can take the response.
I'm not sure how many master teachers there are in the system, or whether there's a limit on the establishment. But my concern would be why the nature of the appraisal. Is it about individual teaching in Monroe, in Stets, at Jamaica College, at Papine High, or is it about, I almost said Manchester United to fly, so don't worry. Yeah. So is it about their performance in the classroom, or is it something else? Because if there's a performance in the classroom, it may come back down to the original sin of this distance counsel intervening in the domestic school system. So again, it needs to be clear. If it's about assessment of the role of master teachers, a general thing, then I can see that being included there. But we have to be careful that we're not just moving from everybody to this special group of masters. And you have to be so defined before you can be treated as a master teacher. I believe that's the case, right?
Okay, so I think the word professional appraisal is open to all kind of interpretation. And it's, you know, in the normal course of using that word, we think of appraising, right? Literally sitting down with somebody and appraising them, which is not what I think the council wants to do with individual teachers.
I think we have already, Chair, we have already determined that. Maybe what Dr. Gordon ought to do is to indicate to us what is being targeted here. What's the specific intention? And maybe that will bring some clarity and purpose of amendment.
And also add that, Minister, probably they can indicate what happens now with the master teacher, because maybe it's a function that currently exists that they're just trying to put into legislation.
The comments are taken. It's an evaluation, Chair, as you have advised us. It's really an evaluation of the master teachers, because that evaluation takes into consideration the master teacher's appraisal at school level. So every 3 years, an overall evaluation is done of the master teacher to ensure that the teacher is operating at the level of a master teacher. So it's really, we can change, Minister, we'll make the amendment. It, as you indicated, it's really an evaluation of the master teacher and not an appraisal, because that evaluation takes into consideration the appraisal of the master teacher at the level of the school or the level of employer.
Minister, I'm not clear on what this appraisal evaluation of the master's teachers thing. I think Minister Green's point is what happens now? How is this appraisal evaluation done? So at least we are clear on what is it you're asking us to agree on.
Okay.
At the level of the master teacher, there's a requirement that every 3 years there's an evaluation of the master teacher to ensure that that person remains a master teacher. Is still a master teacher. It's not a designation where you get it and then you don't demonstrate mastery of the profession forever. It's not a forever designation without evaluation.
So two things for me, Chair, two things for me, because I want to understand before I can appreciate. And so in understanding, what's the master teacher? What is defined as the master teacher? And is this evaluation some sort of a test that they would have to go through every 3 years? You know, in some professions, you have to go through some sort of a clinical test to ensure that you're still at the required standard. Is this what we're talking about in terms of an evaluation of the master teacher?
The master teacher program came out of a negotiation many years ago, in 1996, I think, with the JTA. And there has been established since a National Master Teacher Committee. That committee comprises leading educators and master teachers. there is a process of selection. The person applies, which is what JTA required. The person applies to the master teacher position. The person goes through a process of assessment, demonstration, and so on, and is assessed by a team, and the team takes the report to the National Master Teachers Committee. The committee decides whether such a person should be granted the designation of a master teacher. The person is paid a salary that is equivalent to that of the vice principal of a school and ought to remain a master teacher. After 3 years, every 3 years, the person is evaluated to determine that person is still operating at the standard of a master teacher, because the person continues to receive the salary of a master teacher.
So what does a master teacher do in a school on a daily basis?
A master teacher is usually a master teacher in an area. So a master teacher at primary level, a master teacher in history, a master teacher in professional development, technical vocational education, and so on. The master teacher is designated in an area. Now that teacher in a school provides support for other teachers, and in a quality education circle provides support for teachers from other schools. The master teachers are also our trainers, JTC trainers, because we work with the master teachers to build their competencies in partnership with international organizations. So some of our master teachers are actually trainers in Latin America.
Just a
follow-up question. Member Hamilton had her hand up.
I understand perfectly what was just said. However, a mention was made of the Master Teacher Committee. So is it that the council will now be assuming the roles and responsibilities of that committee, and what we're doing away with that committee? Because if the council will be doing that evaluation, what will be the role of that committee? Or is this a duplication? Because I don't get it.
The committee operates within the ambit of the council.
So, okay, so is that anywhere here for us to acknowledge and accept? Because this is the first I'm hearing about this.
So, no, we now have to contemplate that this professional appraisal is new, and that what would have been represented in, I need to fix these microphones, what ought to be represented is what you have explained. Now, another question I'd like to ask Dr. Gordon. So this evaluation is done, and if the incumbent does not meet the requirement of the expectation, having done the evaluation, then what would be the normal course of action? Because you made reference to being a salary and at the post of vice principal, and there's a certain status that would be guaranteed based on negotiations, and I'm not negotiating for the JTA now, but I would want to have an understanding in terms of if that person evaluated is not attaining the requisite expectation, what's the course of action?
The council informs the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education takes action from there. This is out of the ambit of the council at that point. The ministry is left to take action.
I'm sure you would appreciate that you have now created an anticipation in my bowels about what is going to be done by the action. Yeah.
Sure. I know Member Brown wants to come in, but I heard the question. There are 32 master teachers currently, but we're looking to expand that, right? 32? But we're looking to expand that cadre, yes.
We are looking at an expanded program. In fact, we are putting the appraisal in place. We are digitizing the appraisal with the expectation that we'll be able to identify more easily teachers who are outstanding. So we are expanding the program. There is a dialogue within the Ministry of Education that we have not yet concluded. We did a major evaluation of the master teacher program a couple of years ago and found out that not all the persons who were designated master teachers had stayed master teachers. That's why a decision was made for them to be evaluated every 3 years. Now there's an inconclusive, let me put it that way, discussion within the ministry, because at the end of the day, the council is only responsible for identifying the master teacher. We pass that information on to the chief education officer. The chief education officer informs that this person is now a master teacher. When we evaluate the master teachers, we do likewise. We pass on to the ministry that this person is no longer performing at the level of a master teacher.
All right, and, but I have Member Gale, I have Member Green and Brown ahead of you. Sorry. Member Green?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So we have to determine a number of different things. So my understanding is that a master teacher would be a registered teacher under the Act. And under the Act provides the council already with the power to monitor if the teachers are keeping with the various professional standards, right? So the question is, do we need another stipulation about appraisal evaluation of master teacher? That's the first thing. I'm not sure that we do need it. And the second thing, if we are going to specify that we do need to have by law the power to evaluate master teacher, then we would have to accompany it with the entire scope of the master teacher regime. So, you know, we have to think very carefully. The way I see it already, a master teacher is part of the construct of the teaching profession and would have certain professional standards that would be outlined that they would have to maintain. And the council in the bill as is present would have the power to so assess is not the word. Yeah, assess or evaluate. Yes. So the question is, do we need a special provision for a master teacher? And we couldn't just do one provision. We'd have to have a whole section that speaks to how master teachers are appointed, right? How they're evaluated, and also, as Member Gala said, what happens if the evaluation is not in keeping with the standard set. Again, I'm not sure we need that unless it is that master teachers won't register as teachers.
Okay. Member Brown, I think you had your hand up.
That's correct, Minister. That's correct. I'm grappling with a position that the master teacher policy is a policy issue and not something that we need to put in the legislation in the way it is stated here. I'd like to recommend, and in light of what you just said, Minister, 32 and you intend to grow it, that we borrow the word at L, monitor the development of the master teacher program. So it allow them to continue what they're doing now, and since they don't take the decision as to whether you remain a master teacher or not, would allow them to continue what the committee does by monitoring the development of the master teacher program. And that, I think, would be sufficient, because as this arose out of trade union negotiation, Senator Gale and I are fully aware that once you have a foot in the door or a toe in the door, this is an area that is likely to be subject to further negotiations. So what I'm hearing Dr. Gordon to be saying, a master teacher is not tenured at any point at all. In the university, after certain years, you become tenured. So I can see a negotiation saying after two terms or 3 terms, a master teacher should be tenured and not subject to the regular thing. So to avoid getting into all of that, I'd suggest monitor the development of the master teachers program. So it gives you the master teacher program to continue doing what you're doing now and allow for growth and changes along the way. Those are my thoughts, Minister.
Member Gale, you had wanted to come in?
No, I just wanted to ask Dr. Gordon, in terms of the expansion, it's not just an expansion in numbers, but is the expansion of master teachers in giving an improvement in the subject areas or emerging trends and things like that? No, you made mention, Dr. Gordon, about the expansion of the master teachers from the existing numbers. And I just want to ask whether this expansion will include expansion in other subject areas that are not so defined now, like any emerging trends. Is that the expectation?
Expansion will include numbers for some subject areas, numbers for early childhood education, and also if there are new areas, because there are no emerging areas in education, that the master teachers program will be expanded to these areas. Yeah.
And could I add here that this also allows, having this level of master teachers allows a particular career path for teachers. Yeah, it opens up other opportunities, right?
So I'm a bit uncomfortable still with including the master teacher within this legislation, especially because, as Senator Brown was saying, it's still not concluded within the ministry as to how it is going to operate, or you're still having discussions then. It would be a bit, tricky to include it at this point, even using the term monitor, because monitor to what end, I think we should just leave that out, because as is, with the other powers of the council, you still would be able to do whatever assessment of teachers. So a master teacher is still a teacher, in my opinion.
May I mention?
Member Green?
Sorry. I agree with Member Hamilton and Member Brown completely. We can't include the term master teacher, right? I would suggest that we shouldn't, unless we're going to do a much more comprehensive inclusion, right? We couldn't just leave it like that, because then you'd have to define the term, you'd have to go to the construct. It's captured on the teacher. It's as will occur from time to time. It's a sort of policy position and negotiated policy position, and the council has that flexibility. As you move through the system, you decide that yes, you are registered teachers, but you need to elevate some teachers. Nothing would stop the council in present form, even under an act, from doing something of that nature. And as such, I think the powers are already there. I would strike this clause about conduct professional appraisals and move forward, because the council already has the power to monitor, evaluate, ensure that teachers are keeping within the professional standards, which they could incorporate into the policy of master teachers. I don't believe we need to specifically mention them.
All right, and I think
agree with that,
think
Chair.
we move outside of this to
Chairman,
develop whatever policies we may need to. Go ahead,
So,
May I say the master teachers program is an old program and has been functioning under the council since the council was established. We monitor it, so that the term monitoring development of the master teachers program would be consistent with what we're doing now at the council. Any outcome of there's only one item that has been discussed, and for the most part, the persons we have found who are not functioning in the capacity of master teachers have been near retirement. And so there's always, we have to leave the ministry to do its own negotiation. The function of the council is to ensure that the persons designated as master teachers remain master teachers. And we do provide extra training for them. We do find partnerships for them to work with and to influence the profession positively. In fact, they are key trainers in the profession. So it's not a function that we can just remove from the council because it is there, it's an established function. And so rather than having any details, we just say monitor. We can quite agree to monitor the development of the Master Teachers Program and leave it there. That's...
Chair, sorry to intervene. Like, it's
Go
kind
ahead,
of difficult.
Go ahead, Member Green.
And you're not in the room. But Dr. Gordon, master teachers would be registered teachers, yes?
Yes, they would be registered teachers, but we are putting them now in a category, registered master teachers.
Yes, so would you, no, so we don't have a category by law by the term registered master teacher.
Not at present, but remember the...
No, so that's what I'm saying, Dr. Gordon. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying under L7, where are we? 7(1)L, the council has the power and authority to monitor and ensure the compliance of registered teachers, licensed teachers, instructors with the conditions of registration, professional standards, and professional appraisals. So a master teacher would fall under the category of a registered teacher. A master teacher would have a different sort of professional standard because they're a master teacher. And the council has the authority by law to monitor and ensure compliance with those professional standards. What I'm saying is that because the master teacher is already consumed in a bigger category called registered teacher, at the policy level, you would need to ensure that you have professional standards for your master teachers and have a policy around appointing master teachers. But legally, I don't believe you would need an additional legal framework for the master teacher.
I agree with that wholeheartedly, Chair.
Accept.
Yeah,
because outside of that, you would have to add to this legislation to incorporate all of what you said previously, because if it were not this discussion about master teachers, I would not have had the slightest of inclination that it is a category that is being contemplated underneath the legislation. So I think, as Member Green just said, you could perfectly just include it within what you already have. I too would want to remove 7(1)M.
Yeah.
Yes, Chair, we can accept the recommendation of the member.
Could I just come in before you suggest that? Chair,
please go ahead, Member Brown.
I'm a little concerned that we lump the master teachers in that body of every teacher. And I raise this because we're trying to promote a special grouping to advance the education system. Connected to that is how do we treat principals, since some of the roles of does the council monitor principals in the same way? So I frankly would be, because the master teacher is a special program which is likely to grow and need to grow to assist the education process. I would suggest we consider the point which Dr. Gordon is agreeing with, the monitor the development. So it leaves it there and it gives us flexibility going forward relative to the master's teacher. Member Hamilton, I was fortunate to be negotiating as part of the public sector negotiation with one such master teacher. and also to have sat in the Senate with that master teacher. So that is how I learned about master teacher, because I had to associate for about 2 hours a decade with and Senator Gale as well, with one particular master teacher. And Florida won't say anything about the alma mater of that teacher.
I'm very familiar with the master teacher program. But just to say, Minister...
Yes, please don't say anything about it.
Just to say, Minister and team, the reality is that we could not just monitor the development of the master teacher program and leave that in legislation. That's not how legislations work, because you would then have to define what the master teacher program is. And then you would have to go a bit further to go into the whole rubric of how people qualify for master teachers, right? You know,
like, how you deal with that? Just like, this is about the functions of the council. So think about that when you make that point.
Yeah, because I have. But remember, when you read the legislation, I say the function of the council is to develop the master teacher program. Okay, that is the function of the council by law. So if the council is not developing the master teacher program by law, then the council can be held accountable. Okay, so what does it mean to develop the master teacher program? What is the master teacher program by law? Can the council just do X and it is considered as developing the master teacher program? Or are there some legal requirements that the council would have to tick off so that you can say they're developing the master teacher program? What I'm saying is that we can't just insert a functionality of the council and leave it open, right? I would advise against it, quite frankly. But it does not stop the council. The functionalities are sufficiently broad that the council can do what it is doing in continuing to develop the program, one, continuing to do its various evaluations of the program, two, and there may be a time that we want to define the program and concretize the program by law. And I'm very sure that, as you have said, Sir Brown, those discussions are going to come.
Right. Okay.
Just to add, having a master teacher program is fine. There are other programs that may come down the line as well. So if that's the case, then we would have to now come back to Parliament to include those particular programs. What I would suggest, the professional standards that is referenced in 7L2, you would just need to develop the standards for these particular bodies. And you assess or appraise based on those particular standards and those particular bodies. And then that would, I think, solve the problem. Because, as I said, if we have another body or if we have another entity or particular set of teachers that we want to highlight going down the road, then that would cover it. It is the setting up of the standards that makes a difference.
All right.
What are we agreeing to, Chair?
We are agreeing not to specifically mention master teacher, right? So we would remove. Well, before we get there, we would not include what's recommended here in terms of this specifically including master teachers, right? We would not include that in the law, but the council will continue to carry out the functions. And I agree, Dr. Gordon, that there should come a point when, maybe we develop, as we're thinking about broadening the master teachers, we're going to have to develop some, right, a process around it in terms of how you get there, if you're not maintaining the standards, what happens, and so on, right? Yeah. All right, so members, we are agreed that this would not be, the response
Chair,
would not be included.
We're removing
Oh, we're going
3.
there next.
L3. Stop at professional standards.
Move M.
Right, because that looks like a, right, not a, but they would not be conducting the professional appraisals, right?
No, and that has been the source of a lot of, as Senator Gale said, a lot of discomfort.
Right, so the response says this aspect concerns the governance of professional appraisals and not the conducting of the appraisals. So we should take that out, right? M? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is it to take it out or is it to amend it to reflect what you just said?
1 second, Member
Minister?
Brown. 1 second, Member Hamilton is on the floor.
But in addition to M, Chair, if you look under 7L3, we also have reference to professional appraisals. So we're saying we would remove that one as well.
No, Member
No,
Hamilton.
that's monitoring. They wouldn't be doing, they wouldn't be conducting, right? Just monitoring.
Yeah.
Which is why monitoring of the developmental program would not offend anything.
Currently in the system, and Dr. Gorn, you can correct me, there is an instrument, an appraisal instrument in the system right now. This was implemented last year, I believe, or the year before. Last year, 2020.
Sorry, it's September 2020 it was introduced.
Right, it was introduced, and it's in use. So this is an appraisal instrument for teachers, and this is done at the school level, right?
So this is the day-to-day appraisal we're talking about here now?
Right, but not the conducting of the appraisal. If that makes a difference. You're not the one that's sitting in front of the teacher.
Who the monitored?
Let me ask a little further in terms of the monitoring, because I know in institutions how monitoring takes place is that you ensure that the performance appraisals are done and are done on a timely basis. That's monitoring.
Right. Every 3 years.
No. This is where the employee and the employer. You have situations, Member Cuthbert, where a performance appraisal is not done.
Yes.
And if the monitoring ensures that for school A and school B, that the performance appraisals are done and whatever is supposed to be rewarded outside of that is treated with. The other question that I want to ask, just for clarity in my mind, because you have performance appraisals that are done, that there's no agreement on it. Does the council treat with appeals?
Hierarchy of appeals.
Yes.
The teacher may appeal to the principal.
To the principal.
Or if the principal did the appraisal, the teacher may appeal to the regional director. And then if the regional director, having set up a team to appraise the teacher is still unhappy, that is when the teacher will appeal to the council.
Come to the council. Okay. All right. Fine.
Right. So, Member Gale, I agree with you that we are trying to institute a process whereby teachers are appraised. It's not a punitive process. Right now, it's more to identify areas of strength and weakness so that we know what actions to take to help the teacher in whatever area the appraisal says they are weak in, and to strengthen those areas as well in which they're doing well to make them even better. We're agreeing on just eliminating 7(1)(m). All right. All in favor? Yes. All right, good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that we would not
Yes.
specifically include master teachers, but we recognize that it is something that operates within the council currently and will continue, and they will
Agreed.
go through the process. All right. So let's move on. The functions of council, I think that's where we are now. Right, so we will go to the column marked Teachers Colleges of Jamaica. The recommendation there, it is recommended to remove section 7(1)G. We're on page 6, but we're down to function of council. Oh. Oh, sorry, before we get to that one, staying in the same column here, University of the West Indies, still on page 6, relating to section 7. It was perceived that there were a few overlaps or duplications between the University Council of Jamaica and the Jamaica Teaching Council. And it was recommended that any source of potential confusion arising from any perceived or actual overlap duplicate should be addressed. The technical persons look back and their responses, there are no overlaps between the functions of UCJ and JTC. So we'll accept that and move on to where it's recommended to remove section 7(1)G from the list of stated functions of the council. Section 7.
What is intended, Minister, by the term regulate the practice of teaching? Maybe that will help us if we get a understanding.
I'll call on Ms. Sherland or Ms. Anastasia Gordon. Ms. Sherland?
Yes, Minister. I think it's appropriate for us to ask Dr. Gordon to explain properly. However, in having a discussion with the ministry and with the council, it was being suggested that a couple words be inserted. And then when I read it, perhaps Dr. Gordon can assist us to explain. So, regulate the practice of the teaching profession rather than regulate the practice of teaching. Dr. Gordon and the ministry had suggested that those words be inserted.
Yes,
Member Brown, does that make it any clearer?
The draft to be amended to state regulate the practice of the teaching profession.
Dr. Gordon, go ahead.
Yes, Chair. The draft will be amended we are proposing to indicate regulate the practice of the teaching profession.
Members, any questions? Okay, all right. Yes, that's fine. Accepted. Okay. Yeah. Yep, all right. All right, let's move over to the right of that. To section 2G, which referred to the term paraprofessional. This definition required expansion, and so the response is the bill is to be amended to include consultations with stakeholders. Did we do that already? All right. Okay. All right, accepted. So let's move on to page 7. Well, we're still on functions of council under the Teachers Colleges of Jamaica column. I think we discussed this already. Huh? Right, with amendment, to regulate the practice of the teaching profession. 72G. Yep. Right. But 72G refers to
term paraprofessionals, Chair, and I'm not sure if just including consultation will help.
Yeah.
So remember, we're just talking about consultation and what it means and who we want to include. So maybe based on our previous discussion, we can contemplate whether or not we want to use the term broadly.
Paraprofessional. Okay. What is it that was meant by paraprofessionals?
When you find out, tell me.
Miss Anastasia? Miss Shoreland? Okay, go ahead, Dr.
You addressed
Gordon.
that?
Go ahead, Dr. Gordon.
We were consulting. Sorry about that. What is said here, Minister, Chair, the colleges of education cannot regulate the teaching profession. Teaching profession has to be regulated by a council. And so what is being asked here, when I read the text,
We'll pass that, Dr. Gordon. I think
I'm sorry, Minister.
We're at 2G about provide services to recognize association of professionals and paraprofessionals. We're trying to work out what was meant by paraprofessionals. And that is in keeping with the point raised by the University of the West Indies School of Education.
And the fact that the response doesn't seem to align with what it is that's being asked for.
What was being asked was a definition.
So that's the amendment, right? To include the consultation with the stakeholders.
No, that's not a proper response.
So, Dr. Gordon, we want to know, firstly, who are the paraprofessionals being referred to in the legislation, and then we try to figure out, what the clause is actually trying to achieve.
Sorry, Minister, that statement was directed to those persons in the early childhood program primarily who might be paraprofessionals, and also there's some other categories of persons in the schools.
What is a paraprofessional?
We were asking one consultation to take on the function of these. Pardon?
Who is a paraprofessional?
Paraprofessional, we have to look. Do we have it in definition? It's not defined at this moment. We have to define it.
Okay, go ahead.
We have to define it. We need to define it in the bill.
Well, in its normal everyday meaning, it's a trained aide who assists a professional person, such as a teacher or a doctor. So that's the dictionary meaning for a paraprofessional. So if we decide to define it, it would be because it means something a little different from its normal dictionary meaning.
My understanding of paraprofessionals are those who provide assistance and support to in certain disciplines. Yeah. So maybe in the health field, you have that support cadre that gives, that complements So in this case, is the assistant teacher defined as a paraprofessional?
The lab technicians.
The lab technicians, yes. The pharmacy technicians that provide support to the pharmacists.
The social workers.
Yeah.
Actually, we were asked to include it in one of the consultations. It came up in one of the consultations that we had, national consultation, and we were asked to give attention to this group, to include the group in the functions of the bill.
So what we need to do now is just to define them in the
based on the discussion here, Chair, it would appear that it is a very broad term, paraprofessionals, but Dr. Gordon mentioned early childhood only. So is it that we're treating with just those persons within the early childhood institutions, or it is a term that we are going to accept as a general term for anybody who fits that category? Is that what we're doing?
We're going to accept this as a general term. But in the early childhood commission, it's common.
1 second, Member Brown, Dr. Gordon is on. Can you finish your sentence, Dr. Gordon, and then we'll take you, Member Brown?
It will be accepted now. Well, as we have written it as a general term, it applies to the entire sector. But it came up because it is prevalent in the early childhood program. So we will have to look at it as a general term to be used across the sector.
Chair, I think Member Brown wanted to say something, and then I'll come back.
Member Brown, go ahead now.
My point was, there are guidance counselors, for example, in the system. Are they part of this paraprofessional? Because they may not, guidance counselors may not be teachers. So I'm not for defining the groups, but I am for the intent of Parliament to be expressed in this committee as to who they are, so that in future we're clear that it covers, as Dr. Gordon and Member Hamilton says, from early childhood to guidance counselors to chaplains who may not be guidance counselors, and groups like that who are an integral part of the education system.
We will define the term, Minister, paraprofessional. We'll provide the interpretation in the part 1 of the bill, where we have interpretation of terms.
Chair, I will agree with that proposal, but I'll also not accept the response of just including consultation as being proposed here. Because that wouldn't solve the problem.
I don't think that's an appropriate response to this particular.
Agreed.
Yeah, it might have.
This is one of them that it wouldn't.
Yeah, it wouldn't apply to this at all. What I see here is that the council is saying that they would have the ability to provide services, right, to recognize associations of professionals, for example, those who work in the early childhood sector and so on, right?
So as is now, I think the clause is fine. I think the only issue was who these paraprofessionals
are. Right, so we need to define.
Right, just to define it. And once we define it, it should be good.
Okay. All right, so we accept that there will be an amendment to include the definition of paraprofessionals. All right.
Of the council under Teaching Council of Jamaica.
Right, so we dealt with that
already. We dealt with that already?
We dealt with, we dealt with 713M, and we deleted, we agreed to delete 713M from the list of functions. Yeah, so we're on page 8. Yes, yes. So we're on page 8. And we're at the second one, the recommendation. It is recommended to move section 7.1 PI, or is that P1 and 2, to section 7.3D 1 and 2, and section 1P 1 and 2 would be more appropriately grouped, and there's a reference to the word shall in that. So let's go to section 7.1P. Right, where it says, consider and make recommendations to the minister on matters relating to the education, training, and career development of teachers, and whether subject to section 34, a person is a fit and proper person to teach, and 2, the supply of registered teachers and licensed teachers, meaning consider and make recommendations on the supply of registered teachers and licensed teachers. But it was talking about a grouping of these and moving some sections into other ones. And then it goes on to talk about the obligatory nature. I'm not seeing the connection between those. Not seeing the connection between the recommendation and the rationale.
Minister, it has to be read with the stem at clause 1, 7.1. It says, subject to the provisions of this act, the functions of the council shall be to, and it goes to P, consider and make recommendations. So that's where the shall comes in.
Okay. But what about the recommendation to move the sections and to group them? You don't, okay, just leave them as is. Okay.
So,
as we have indicated in our response, Minister, it's supposed to be obligatory and not discretionary.
Okay.
So it should be shall and not.
And not discretionary. All right. We accept that.
Agreed.
And move on to page 9. Let's take item 10, section 10, professional standards. Again, Teachers Colleges of Jamaica. It is being proposed to amend section 10.1. Immediately following, the council shall add the word in consultation with the Teachers Colleges of Jamaica and representatives of the various educational institutions. And I think in the response, it says the bill to be amended to include consultation with stakeholders in education. It sounds like one that we have dealt with in another section. So let's look at section 10, section 10.1.
Minister, this is similar to clause 7.1J that we had discussed earlier. This consultation needs to be a closed group, so we're proposing to adopt a similar wording in consultation with bodies engaged in teacher development for this consultation as well.
I support that.
Minister.
I support that.
Agreed.
And not what is being suggested here to define one group.
No.
Right.
So we agree with that. Let's move over to the right of that, to the University of Technology. Recommendation for section 10 in relation to professional standards will be standards applied to different categories of teachers in the same way and at the same rate, from beginning teachers to experienced teachers and master teachers. And essentially the response is that different standards exist for different categories of teachers, yeah. All right, so no change there.
These standards exist, Minister.
Yes.
We have standards for different categories of teachers.
Okay, so
yes.
no change.
They exist.
All right. All right, we'll move on to section 11. It's the Ecumenical Education Committee and the Jamaica Council of Churches. It's pointing us to section 11.2b. In developing the continuing, it should say professional development rather than personnel development, right? Professional development. Add, shall consult with the owners of schools as well as such bodies that are in the opinion of the council representative of the majority of teachers. And I would imagine a similar, right? A similar amendment here, as we discussed earlier on. Members, you're in agreement? Yeah. Okay.
Because again, this speaks to a grouping that wants to define themselves alone.
Into the law.
And since we have moved away from that to one that is holistic in nature, then we continue to use the same approach.
Yes.
Minister, I'm mulling the issue of the majority. I agree with the general direction. But if there's a body that, let me use that terrible example, not because the organization, if you had a group like Capri, for example, in the education sector, but they don't represent a majority, but a sufficiently important think tank, would we want to exclude consultation with such a body? So it is a majority word, the word majority, that bothers me, because it can become exclusive rather than allowing for more inclusivity, which is what I think we'd all prefer. So it's just about whether the drafters can find a language that doesn't exclude where we would want to benefit from the expertise or competence, but they're not a majority. Or put another way, we may want to consult with, say, people at UTech, but compared to probably the University of West Indies, I'm just pulling these out, they are not a majority. So it's to find a way to inclusive and not being overburdened, but not excluding because of the language we choose.
All right, what I'd like to ask is for our technical persons to just reread that amendment that we're going to carry through the bill wherever it seeks for consultation. Just reread it, because I think it included.
Yes, Minister. It says in consultation with bodies engaged in teacher development.
So bodies can define themselves as engaged with teacher development, they're included, right?
Member Brown. So when you raised the example of a Capri might not be involved in teacher development, but it might be a group that is interested. Now, would the area that speaks to the council thinks necessary be a term used to capture an interested group? In other words, if the council can decide whether or not it wants to hear from that particular body.
So I would just say, Minister, remember this requirement for consultation does not necessarily exclude those groupings. It just dictates that you must consult with these groupings, right? So there would be nothing to stop the council if they think it fit to consult with a Capri. But what the law will be saying is that you have to consult with institutions that are involved in teacher development. I think that is what we want the law to say. In a broad-based way, no singly, no special grouping, but say that you have to consult with groups that are involved in teacher development. If the council wants to bring in Capri or any other study group or any other NGO that they think is germane to what they're discussing, then so be it. But by law, they have no choice but to consult with these teacher development organizations.
All right, I think we're at a settled position on that. So let's move on to the recommendation from the Teachers Colleges of Jamaica. And this is in relation to section 11.1. Again, we're dealing with the same issue in terms of an entity seeking to have itself, right, embedded. Right, so this is the same. This is the same. And the response is the same? Right, that in consultation with bodies engaged with teacher development. All right. All right. So we move over to University of Technology. Regarding continuing professional development framework, same, we're still on section 11. They're interested to know what are the core traits of effective standards for teachers that are to be reinforced and promoted in the continued professional development. The response there is that details of the administration of the professional development framework will be in the regulations. The structure for continuing professional development is already set up, established standards, and these contribute to professional competency matrix. All right, so in the regulations. All right, let's move on to section 14, Ministerial Directions. Teachers Colleges of Jamaica is recommending that section 14 be deleted. Section 14 says that the minister may, after consultation with the chairman of the board, give to the board in writing such directions of a general character as to the policy to be followed by the council in the performance of the functions of the council as appear to the minister to be necessary in the public interest, and the board shall give effect to the directions. That's what's written in all of our laws, right, Ms. Anastasia, right, Ms. Sherland, as to the relationship between the minister and the board of the various entities. We have to give policy guidance to those boards. Minister, go ahead, Minister.
Just to state, this is a standard approach in legislation that gives the minister the authority. And so I'm kind of concerned when any grouping would want to take that authority away from the minister. And then when the minister does not deliver, you raise concern. It's an awesome authority given to a minister that must be respected.
I agree.
And I'm not supporting this. And I've seen it before, where people raise concern about the minister having such authority, but then you expect and you want to rate the minister, and you don't want to give the minister the level of accountability and authority. They must stop it, man.
Well said, member. Let's move on to part
Mister,
3.
no, before I move on, Mister, I understand this section 40 to be limited to such direction of a general character as to the policy. That's what it's talking about, and I don't regard that as political interference. But that's the limitation that is put there by the legislation, and I'm not opposing it.
Thank you, Member Brown. Member Green, did you want to make an intervention?
I was agreeing with Member Brown, and that doesn't happen regularly, so I just wanted to ensure that it's on record.
Glory, glory, Man United.
Is that a watershed moment?
right, thank you. We'll move on to part
We'll forgive
3.
them. We'll forgive them.
We'll move on to part 3, registers and role of instructors, section 20. We're on page 11. Observation concerns query. We're on the university, the column marked University of Technology. Right, so we're section 20. The query, the concern, the observation comes from the University of Technology. We question whether a teacher or lecturer will only be granted a license in one subject area, and if a teacher or lecturer has, for example, a first degree in chemistry, but a master's in environmental science, will he or she be licensed to teach both disciplines? We're concerned that limitations of the subjects that a teacher or lecturer is licensed to teach in such cases will exacerbate shortage of teachers in some subjects such as maths and physics, so on. All right, and the short response is that the license will not be subject specific. Yeah, it will not be subject specific. Yeah. All right, accepted members. Section 22, inspection of registers and role of instructors. We're on page 12. Under Jamaica Teachers Association, under that column heading, recommendation, section 22, permits registered licensed teacher to inspect all of the information on the registers and rolls. This would include information such as addresses. The Data Protection Act protects the privacy of certain data and so forth. The response is the bill will be amended to indicate the information that the public or a prospective employer will be able to access. The information accessible to these categories of persons are the name of the person, whether that person is registered, licensed, or authorized to teach.
Yes.
Okay, we accept that. Let's move over to the column entitled Teachers Colleges of Jamaica. The recommendation there is to amend section 22 to exclude prescribed information from public access. And I believe that sounds like the same. Yeah. Right. All right, so we're on page 13. Page 13, we're at section 24, prohibition against practicing as a teacher without being registered and licensed or authorized. Yeah, let's save it for or next. Yeah, because this is going to require. Yes, yeah. This is going to. Yes.
Agreed.
This is one, Chair, that I would also want to ensure that my colleagues in the virtual space were present in the physical space to discuss.
Yes. I agree.
All right.
I agree with you. It's just that you have to dilly two things, because I'm actually seeing people in the meeting at the same time. So while it's very important that we're there physically, but there are other things that, we're doing as well.
All right, members. We are at a point where we will end. Do we end or we skip over that? Okay, so we will. Yes, this is really lengthy and deserve all of our attention.
Minister.
Yes.
May I suggest? I know that members will be reading prior to, but just to ensure that it is read, so that if there are any disagreement with our responses, then we can be aware of it. There are responses from the ministry in terms of what we are suggesting. It's outlined in the document. Very well, member. Very well, member. Thank you.
Where's it? Where's the minutes? Where's it?
It's a motion for adjournment.
All right, one
Yes,
second,
Minister.
please. Where's the agenda? Where is it? Okay. All right. Any other business? The date of the next meeting. All right. The date of the next meeting is Thursday, September 29, 2022 at 2 p.m. And as usual, it will be hybrid, but we're recommending that given the gravity, the importance of this section 24, that we strongly recommend that persons be present for this debate and deliberation. All right. So we are at adjournment.
Seconded, Chair.
Moved by Member Cuthbert, seconded by Member Hamilton. Was that you? All right. Thanks. Thank you, members. Thank you so much.
This is IROI. IROI is